Welcome to Policy Matters, a show by the League of Women Voters of the Fort Wayne area. I'm Nancy Hansen, and today I have with me Judge John Surbeck, whom I've known now for, 3-4 years maybe?
At least.
Probably. And I've only really known John on a social basis, but today we're going to be talking about the law because he is retiring soon. We're talking on November 2nd, and your replacement was named yesterday. And I forget his name. I'm sorry.
David Zent.
David Zent.
He's our magistrate in the misdemeanor court.
And what is the difference between a magistrate and a judge?
A magistrate is a judicial officer that's appointed by the judges.
Okay.
We are either elected or appointed by the governor.
Okay, and we're going to talk about electing judges in a little bit. But having known you socially, I've never really talked with you about the law.
No.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your career to start, because you've had a pretty long, distinguished career. And I want to know why you picked the law as a profession in the first place.
Truthfully, my mother, especially my parents were both committed to my being a professional. There wasn't anything in particular I wanted to do. So I got kind of nudged in the direction of law school.
Okay, and you're not that much older than me, so that would have been in the 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah, when a lot of people were going to law school.
Yes.
And I did not realize until a few weeks ago that the Roman Catholic Church sent a lot of priests and nuns to law school in the 60s to help with helping people with equal rights and that sort of thing.
Was that right? No,
I thought that was really interesting.
I was not aware of that at all.
So you became a lawyer, and how many years did you work as an attorney in private practice?
16.
16.
As a private practitioner and as a public defender.
Okay. Oh, public defender.
Yeah. I was a public defender for 16 years.
How does that... I was in conversation with somebody the other day who's working on bail.
Yeah.
And the idea that if you're really poor, you're not going to have the cash to pay bail. Or they were going to cash bail.
That's a whole nother issue that I've been working on in Indianapolis for several years, and I hope that my successor continues in that effort.
So is there a move to eliminate cash bail?
There is a major bail reform going on across the country. The two gold standards are Washington, D.C. and Kentucky.
Kentucky?
Yeah.
Really? That's interesting.
Kentucky's way ahead. Always have been. I know that we kind of make fun of Kentucky, but as a public defender, when I was a public defender, their PD system was way ahead of ours, and I think still is. And similarly, they've been doing basically pretrial release without cash bond for 20-plus years, very successfully. And finally now, within the last 5 years, there are a number of very credible studies indicating that, in fact, not only do folks who are released on their own recognizance commit less crime, don't commit crime, and appear for court at least as well and frequently better than those released on a cash bond.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do they know why?
The theory right now that's being forwarded by many of the advocates is that, and they've nicknamed it with 3 days count. The social studies approach is that if you keep somebody in jail 3 days or more, or as little as 3 days, it will have a significant impact on their life. Most of these people are marginal people anyway, and if you keep them in jail, they lose their job, their house, their family, everything is probably very tentative. If they're working at all, they're working at some minimal job. They've lost their job, and it just brings their life crashing down on them. And those people, and again, like I say, there are credible studies to indicate that you keep them more than 3 days, they're more likely to commit crime. they're less likely to show up in court. And the one that amazed me, that I had to stop and reread several times to be sure I read it right, was that they are more likely to commit crime after they go to the penitentiary and get out. If they're arrested on crime one and they don't get out of jail, they're found guilty, they're sent to the penitentiary, they get out, they do parole, and then they're more likely to commit crime two than those who are released within 3 days.
And is the theory behind that the fact that they're put in with more hardened criminals who kind of train them to go on to bigger and better things, so to speak?
That's part of it. But I think the initial, really the strongest element is that when those marginal people are kept away out of their life for 3 days in the jail, their entire life comes apart.
Interesting. So as a public defender, does the court say you're going to defend this person, or do you have the right to say no? How do you get assigned to a case?
In Allen County, we have a public defender system. We have a public defender agency. It's a different, as with so many things in Indiana, whatever's going on, there's probably 92 different ways to do it. In Allen County, we have a public defender office, a chief public defender, and I can't tell you anymore how many lawyers we have, but they're kind of segregated into what they're capable of doing or what they are doing, whether it's serious felonies. I hear serious felony cases, and I have probably 6 or 8 lawyers that I see regularly.
Okay.
Similarly, Judge Davis hears drug cases and low-end felonies, and she has a different group. Misdemeanor has a different group. Juvenile has a different group.
Okay.
And
so you kind of get a specialty then as the defense attorney.
And yes, and then the chief public defender assigns individual cases to individual lawyers.
Okay. Do you have the right to say, no, I won't defend this person?
I think you give that up when you take the job, subject to real conflicts. That the defense lawyer has represented one of the prosecution's witnesses or something of that sort.
Okay. So you were a defense attorney for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to run for judge?
Literally, things tend to happen to me, Nancy. I don't generally, and just to start where we are right now, people say to me, well, you need a plan. You have to have a plan for your retirement. I'm thinking, I never planned anything. Why would I start planning now?
You sleep in and run around in your sweats.
Yeah. For as long as I can. The only plan I have is to stay out of my wife's way.
And for those of you who know Jane Surbeck, who's head of the Christmas Bureau, she's a hoot and a howl. So I understand where you're coming from. And love you, Jane, if you're listening.
So where I got off. I really did get off.
You're talking about having a plan, and
you
don't have a plan.
I don't have a plan.
But what got you?
What got me started? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was literally sitting. I was in the middle of, I believe it was a homicide case, and I looked up at the judge and I thought, I could do what he does, and I think maybe I'd like to. And I'd worked for this same judge when I first came to town. And he was a very good judge. He could be a very difficult person in court, but in the meantime, he taught us all very, very well. I learned that you had to be prepared, and he expected us to be prepared. And I probably got better lessons and better mentoring from him than I ever did from anybody. But that's how it came about, and then there were 3 vacancies. First, a civil division vacancies. We have 9 judges in the Allen Superior Court. 4 of them are civil division, 2 of them are family division, and 3 of them are criminal division. And I put my name in. I applied for the civil division. I made the cut to the 3. There's a commission that interviews all of the applicants and reduces that number to 3 and submits the 3 to the governor. And that's exactly what's just happened with Dave Zent.
Okay, so you did not run for office then,
No.
correct? Okay. Well, I'll have another question for you a little bit later
Okay.
about that.
I applied then for the family division, and same situation. I made the cut to 3, but didn't make the judgeship. And I was about ready to give up, and Jane said to me, well, you need to do this at least one more time. And there was an opening in the criminal division, so I said, okay, I'll apply, and if it doesn't work, we'll move on and do something else. Well, I was appointed, and here I am.
Where did you go to law school?
Bloomington.
Bloomington?
Yeah,
Okay.
IU.
So you're an Indiana native then?
Yes and no. I was born in Evansville. We moved from there when I was very, very young and moved around. I wound up going to high school in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
But in the meantime, we had family in southern Indiana who talked IU from the time I was old enough to know about. And so that's how I wound up at IU for undergrad and law school.
Indiana and Nebraska have a lot in common. I mean, there's the college that you go to,
Yeah.
Or the university. As I was thinking about questions to ask you, because I wanted to get into a little bit more to the law in general than your personality, what's the most unusual case that you've ever heard, or the one that has really stuck with you?
The one that sticks with me is the one I did from Indianapolis, Bizard, the police officer who was drunk on duty and ran into 3 motorcycles at a stoplight, killed one. There were 4 people and 3 motorcycles, killed one guy outright, severely injured 2 others, and the 3rd was not hurt at all. And he was, during the trial, he's the guy I kind of felt sorry for. He was a classic case of survivor guilt.
Oh, yeah, you'd have to be.
Yeah.
So in that case, you were asked to go to Indianapolis to hear a case simply because of the relationship between a police officer and the legal system?
Actually, we tried it up here. It was venued up here.
Oh, okay.
And we tried it up here, spent 3 weeks in trial, and then another 2 or 3 days in closings and deliberations. There were some difficult evidentiary issues that were raised during the case. Demonstrations. The state did a very nice job of creating some video, and the law is kind of unclear about how much of that comes in. If it's demonstrative, for the jury, it can come in. In other words, it would help them understand what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the same video, if you call it a reenactment, it can't. And that was the question that I struggled with. And that's just when the law school here in town was going strong. I went down to their library. They welcomed us into their library. And I did a great deal of work myself and couldn't get it sorted out. And Tom Feltz said I was welcome to use his law clerk, and so I gave the question to her. And within about a day or two, she had 2 pages that perfectly set the thing together that I just couldn't do. And some of the films we let in, some we didn't, with the appropriate discretions between them. He was convicted, and it's been up on appeal, and it was affirmed on appeal. So the way it got here was that the judge recused himself. He'd made a ruling, and he was reversed on appeal. He kept out the blood test, and it was reversed on appeal. One of the judges in the appellate court was the former Chief Justice, our Chief Justice, Randy Shepard, who'd been here 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd retired and was serving as a senior judge in the appellate court. And he wrote the opinion, and it was a very good one. And after that, there was a motion for a change of judge because they'd gotten so much publicity down there over this thing, as you might imagine. And I think during the process, he'd been released on bond and got arrested again for drunk driving. that, of course, couldn't go to that jury. So it came up here, and we tried it up here.
So that leads to the next question, and I've asked a number of attorneys about this over the years. How hard is it for an attorney or a judge to remain objective about someone when you either in your heart of hearts think they might be guilty or just you don't like them as a human being? I mean, does that ever happen? Someone who comes into court and you just kind of go,
Of
ick?
course. Sure. And it happens for lawyers. It happened to me as lawyers, but as well as a judge. But I learned very early on that as a public defender, you did not have the luxury of making a judgment about people. And the same carried over as a judge. My job as a public defender was to present the best defense I could present for somebody. Everybody is entitled to the best defense that you can give them, whether you like them or not.
And you're not the first person to tell me that, so that's good.
And that's the way I always reminded myself, is that you don't have the luxury of making a judgment. This is not a decision, an opinion you can make. So just don't even go there. And the same is true as a judge. And it's even when it's a struggle sometimes is it sentencing. Now our sentencing statute has been very nicely set up in order to provide guidance, provide discretion and yet guidance to a judge. It provides limits to each class of offense and pluses and minuses that we can add and subtract, and reasons for which we can add or subtract years from sentences. So it's very neatly guided, still permitting the judge a great deal of discretion.
Okay. I did not prep you on this particular question, and just to let you all know, whenever I do one of these interviews, I give the person I'm interviewing the questions in advance just to give them kind of a heads up, because this is not a gotcha kind of situation. We're trying to educate people. Do you ever watch shows about the law? Like the most current one that I watch is Bull, but there was Boston Legal and shows like. Do you ever watch those?
Some of them.
What do you think?
It's entertainment, and sometimes. Sometimes I think that they try to play or illustrate real social problems, but in the course of it, they tend to ignore the law frequently.
I've wondered about that.
I watch the stuff for entertainment. It's every once in a while I get irritated. You can't do that.
I've always wondered about that because I know Bull, which I watch because I like Michael Weatherly from NCIS,
Yeah.
but and because it's based on Dr. Phil McGraw. And
Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but he always wins. I don't think in the 2 or 3 years the show's been on that he's ever lost. Which
Well, neither did Perry Mason.
Well, this is true, but never really watched Perry Mason. He was too serious. So. There are judges who get elected by the people.
Yes.
And I know, like, I voted the Monday of this week, and there were 2 judges that was asked should they be retained in office. I had not heard either one of their names before. I had no idea who they were. So I thought, well, if they haven't made the newspaper, they're probably okay.
They're both good judges.
Good.
The one for the Supreme Court is fairly new, and I think it was Slaughter. And the Court of Appeals judge was Bob Altice, I believe, who is a very good judge. He was a great trial judge and does a good job as a Court of Appeals. Our Court of Appeals and Supreme Court are on a retention. The rest of us are on a straight election. And again, there's 92 ways to select people. Allen County was once upon a time on an appointment and retention vote, one of the legislators got mad at one of the judges because of a ruling in his wife's divorce case. So he was bound and determined to take it back to straight partisan election, which is what the circuit court, Tom Feltz in circuit court, is elected on a straight partisan basis.
Okay.
Superior Court is elected on a nonpartisan basis. And the difference becomes, and there are a couple of things. There's a limitation on campaign financing of $10,000, which is not much.
No.
You don't get a partisan support. Allen County is strongly Republican. You don't get that support, although most people who are aware of who the judges or judicial candidates are generally know what their politics were before they got into the arena. But you can't work off of that in an election, a campaign. And see, I was appointed to an unexpired term of Judge Jackson in 1988, and then I ran in 1990, and have run every 6 years since then, and have never been opposed.
So originally you were appointed, but then you started
Right.
running for
Right.
office or running for judge.
Now, for instance, the judge who will take my place, Dave Zent, will be up for election in 2 years.
Okay.
And he was appointed by the governor 60 days ago. Our Judicial Selection Commission met and interviewed, I think there were half a dozen candidates, selected 3, sent them to the governor. The governor had 60 days to make a decision. And he has been, historically, since he's been in office, he's been using most of that time. He's had a larger number than usual of judicial appointments, and he has taken 56, 7, 8, 9 days. I think his 60th day was Monday, and he made the call last night.
Do you think in this day and age, particularly, and part of the reason I'm asking this is that I just finished the Constitution 101 class, and I was one of the judges for We the People this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, good.
It's really difficult these days to talk about the Constitution without bringing politics into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the 2 attorneys that I was on the team with today, I think the 3 of us did a pretty good job, all things considered. But does electing judges, and even the way we pick Supreme Court judges these days, does that politicize the process too much? And I hate to bring Judge Kavanaugh into it, but that was very politicized.
He necessarily has to come into this conversation. And reading through your proposed questions, or generally the categories of things you wanted to talk about, I'd never thought about it before. There are pros and cons to each. Number one. Number two, appointments get as politicized as an election does, especially now. I like our system, actually, the nonpartisan part. Similarly, everybody's going to call their legislator to call the governor to support one of the 3 candidates that went up to the governor for appointment. On the other hand, in an election, as you just said, you didn't know any of those people on there. Nobody does.
Unless you go to court a lot.
Yeah.
If you're an attorney or... Yeah.
So there are pros and cons, and it's bound to be politicized regardless, I believe.
Okay.
And I don't think I'd ever thought about that until you proposed that. I thought, yeah.
Well, I had never really thought about it all that much either until the Kavanaugh hearings.
Yeah.
And then it really struck me. But having gone to journalism school, I'm not a real fan of cable news because the world still is not moving fast enough for 24/7 coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think the announcers get people stirred up just to fill some time. And I don't think that's healthy necessarily, and I know my journalism school advisor is spinning like a top in his grave these days. So one of the things that the League of Women Voters did when we first got started about 10 years ago in Fort Wayne, and restarted actually because the League had been here before, was we had a candidate forum for the election of a judge. And it was when Wendy Davis ran against Judge Scheibenberger and Louis Griffin.
Okay, yeah.
And Louis happens to be a friend of my husband's and me. And the thing that really surprised me as people were leaving that forum was that people were surprised at how much judges have to follow the law, which said to me that they watched an awful lot of legal shows on TV. That was kind of the thing that struck me. So, and you talked a little bit about how you have some leeway as a judge insofar as sentencing and that sort of thing. So I guess my question along those lines was, is the law too strict about sentencing? Is it not strict enough? Is it a reasonable balance? Because one of the things that I think struck a number of people was that Judge Davis was a lot more hard line about, I hate to use the word punishment, but punishment than Louis Griffin or Judge Scheibenberger, which being the female of the trio surprised a lot of people. But on the other hand, that's who she is. And I've met her. We have the same hairdresser, so I've sat in the hairdresser's salon and chit-chatted with her, and she's a Facebook friend. But it was kind of a surprise to me that she was much more hardline than the guys were. But is the law okay the way you are a judge can?
I believe so. I think there's a good separation. I don't know that isn't the word I want, but there's a fair amount, as I said, there's a fair amount of guidance, but yet a large amount of discretion within that guidance, so that everybody knows. A defendant or lawyer, or a defendant's lawyer, or the state for that matter, should be able to have some expectation of what to expect. Judges don't pick numbers out of the air, and I don't think any state allows that. Some are tighter than others. The federal court is notorious for having sentencing guidelines, and figuring out a sentence is basically a numbers game. How long did you live someplace, and how many prior crimes have you committed, and this and that, and the bottom line is, then you do 60 months. One of the northern states, Minnesota, has a similar sentencing guideline that it's literally an arithmetic equation.
So there's no human factor.
Not much. There's some. There's a little bit, but not much. We have, as I understand it, we have a great deal more leeway. And in fact, the revamp of the criminal code in 14, I think it was 14, provided more, took out most of the mandatory minimum sentences. Used to be under the old code, the 77 code, and I was around when that came in too.
That's not that long ago.
Well, some people think otherwise.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah, I was born 2 years after that.
Yeah.
But in the old code, there were minimum mandatories if you had a prior conviction. And you got a second conviction, it was the judge was required to sentence you to executed time at the DOC. I think most of those minimum mandatories have been removed. And when I say I think, even though it's been several years, I still have to go back to the new code to do sentencing. I did the old code since 1977 until 2014, so I knew that one pretty well, but I have to go back and look every time on the new ones just to be sure I got the numbers right.
So you have a little more discretion then as a judge as to the final sentence.
Yes.
Even if the jury says guilty,
Oh, yeah, that's
then you have a little bit of leeway there.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. The advisor I had in college for journalism was a real stickler for precision of language. And I will never forget this. He said, just because a jury finds you guilty of murder does not make you a murderer. So you don't call someone a murderer in a news story because the jury might have been wrong. And I mean that's really parsing the language, but that's
a couple of steps too far for me.
That's where he was. So, well, he didn't want us to get sued, so I thought that was probably
Well,
a good thing. So, kind of moving away from court, when legislators and the city council are looking at changing laws or passing new laws, do they go to the judges to ask what you think about where their thought process is going? Have you ever had a legislator ask you that?
Actually, when they passed the new code, they did. There was probably a year-long study commission that was chaired by, I can't call his name right now, but that made recommendations based upon what any number of people came to testify about on a more informal basis. And all legislators have some kind of, committee hearing type process, protocol. On the other hand, if there is legislation that's of interest to people, they may well call the legislature, and I mean either the state legislature or the local county or city council. The judges or whoever may call those people to talk to them about, this is who I am and these are my feelings about this situation.
And
and
do
we
they
do it
listen? Do they listen?
sometimes.
Okay.
I'm real happy with our current county council. We haven't always gotten along well with county council. But with this county council, and progressively over the last several years, have come to a more mutual respect.
Okay.
When I first started on the bench, county council didn't care much for the judges. And it was funny because the same thing I noticed with the judges was that even though we were judges and we were lawyers and dealt with the law every day, when we had or when those guys had an objection to county council, it deteriorated into a very emotional, more of a common public response to something rather than a lawyerly approach to prove how it was they're wrong. It's been a funny progression over the years.
Interesting. That was long before I ever moved here, so
Yeah.
I can't comment. But there's a lot of emotion that goes into politics, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Which is sometimes good, sometimes awful, and
Mm-hmm. See, the Kavanaugh situation, I don't think had anything to do with Mrs. Ford, Dr. Ford. It was an effort to get rid of a potential judge who, from everything I saw and heard, is pretty capable, because there was a risk that he might vote against some of the things that they wanted done. I've always been convinced that judges all the way up the ladder, from where we are clear up through the Supreme Court, work very hard to enforce the law. There are folks that go outside and create law, and I don't think that's right. Now, Justice Scalia was a very strong conservative who did literal interpretations of the words, not necessarily the words in the context of the current atmosphere. And so you have different judges, but I think the attack on that put Dr. Ford in the middle was simply an effort to see to it that Kavanaugh was not appointed because they're afraid of how he might rule in Roe versus Wade. It's just that simple. As far as I'm concerned, Feinstein made Dr. Ford into a victim. She victimized that woman.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't heard that, but
in my opinion, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Because she seems like a nice lady.
Yeah.
She wrote a letter that was to be confidential, and what do you know? It got leaked. But yet, at the same time, the people that were forwarding her story were also terribly self-righteous about it.
Well, welcome to America in 2018.
Yep.
I won't go any further with that. Several years ago, I think this might have been right after I first met you, the League of Women Voters was looking at forming a court watch in Fort Wayne. And the Omaha, Nebraska League has a court watch whereby they have a group of people who go to court and watch how judges perform. They feed that information to the Omaha World Herald so that the Omaha World Herald can write stories about judges coming up for re-election or for re-election so that the public knows a little bit about them. And I always thought that was a really interesting thing, so I was trying to get some people interested in doing that and failed. But Judge Surbeck was helpful in you introduced me to Fran Gull, and we talked several times.
Yeah.
Do you think because after the Kavanaugh thing, having people who are not trained in the law going and evaluating judges is a good idea? I'm starting to waffle on that a little bit.
Oh, hadn't thought about that. If you're going to do a court watch, could be a very good thing, and I know that some places use it very well, and I don't know specifically about Omaha one way or another, but I know that around the country there are places that place a great deal of weight on court watchers or on judge evaluation. Some places, the Bar Association may do a survey of the lawyers.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Did they do that here?
They tried to, and I don't think they got it done either. My only concern about civilian, non-lawyer court watchers is it could probably be done effectively if it was very carefully structured. I mean, just to ask 6 people to go sit in court and write out what they thought about the judge to me, is worthless.
Yeah, you have to have some sort
of a criteria. There needs to be criteria, and there needs to be a gradient of criteria. And the other thing would be very hard today because everybody has become very separated into their places of conservatism or liberalism, rather than the middle of the road that I grew up with in the 60s. There were strong feelings then too, but people crossed the aisle, and today it's very unusual for people to cross the aisle.
I was saying to Tom, my husband, one day that I kind of missed the 1960s, and he thought I was crazy. But in the 60s, people rallied around issues, not around their political party.
Bingo. That's very good. I like that. Yes,
and
that's right.
And so people did cross the aisle. And if you were anti-Vietnam War or pro-civil rights or whatever, didn't make any difference what political party somebody belonged to. You were about the issue. And now even the issues are divided along political lines,
absolutely.
Which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
No.
I think people stop thinking when they do that, but that's just a personal opinion. In looking at the law and television and court trials on TV the Kavanaugh thing and Boston Legal and Bull and all of that. What facets of the law do you think Americans fail to understand? What don't we get? And he's pondering now, I can tell.
Yeah. That's a tough question. That's a good question. When you say what things, what do you mean what things? You talking about the difference between criminal and civil?
To a certain extent, yes, but I think probably in some cases there's a feeling that certain people can get away with crimes because of their social standing or the amount of money they have or who they know and that sort of thing. That if you're poor, you're less likely to get a fair trial than if you have wealth. Notoriety, like with O.J. Simpson, in his trial. And are we as Americans confused about the law or too accepting of the way things are going, or?
The abuses that you described early in your question, I think clearly took place years ago. I may be naive, but I think for the most, and clearly those kind of abuses happen even now, but not to the extent that they used to. I remember when I was a young lawyer. I was already a lawyer, so it was after 71. The big scandal in Chicago with all the judges that were on the take. I think those things are gone.
That's good.
And the other thing was, short of people with a great deal of money that can invest however much in a defense, the average working person probably that hires his own lawyer probably doesn't get as good a defense as the poor person who has a public defender because
Really?
there are more resources.
Interesting. That I find that surprising. I think that might surprise a lot of people because you think of public defenders as you see them on TV, these poor young attorneys who just got out of law school and they haven't got a clue, but that's not necessarily true because there are public defenders around here who have been public defenders a long time.
And I'd like to think that when I was a public defender, including up until today, although both agencies, the prosecutor's agency and the public defender's agency, are struggling with people back and forth. But our sense always was that the public defenders were way ahead of the prosecutors. What happened was that it was the reverse of the military. They always said in the military, the lawyers, the JAG officers, were first defense lawyers, and once they got good, they got to be prosecutors. It's the reverse in private practice. Prosecutors is a good place to start to get some trial experience, get into court on a regular basis, and when you get good, you go out on your own and make a much better living.
True.
And that's generally been true in my experience throughout my career.
Interesting. So as you're winding down, first of all, I have to ask you, I heard some conversation about that you might get involved with the prosecution of the gentleman who's been accused in the April Tinsley case. Is that true?
I'm going to hear it.
You're going to hear the case?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it going to be heard here, or do you know yet?
Well, as of right now, everybody is speculating that it will get settled.
Oh, really?
If it doesn't, we'll either have to venue it out, or probably what we typically do in Allen County. Fran's going to do it with, and I don't know the people's name, but the infant who died was Malachi. I'm
not sure,
but I think she's doing that, and she's doing the death penalty case, Dansby.
Okay.
And what we have typically done is brought in juries from out of town
Oh, okay.
and try them here. That gives us control of the case. You have to, of course, sequester the jury. You got to put them up because you brought them in from Indianapolis. I've done several cases like that where I brought juries in from Indianapolis.
And when they're sequestered, they cannot watch television or
Nope.
read a newspaper,
Nope.
right?
Nope.
No
It's-
magazines.
It's tough for juries.
Yeah, that would make me crazy.
Mhm.
But yeah. So, for the time that you've been on the bench, do you have any regrets that you want to share?
No, I really don't.
Good.
The only thing, I always said the only thing about my job that I didn't like was that I had no control over my time, because our trial schedules are out 4 to 6 months, set 4 or 5 cases deep, at least 4 or 5 cases deep, sometimes twice that, every day for 6 months. So if I wanted to make plans for a month from now, I couldn't do it because I had cases on my calendar. In the meantime, you still knew, and the frustrating part is you knew that 3/4 of those cases are going to get settled before trial, but you never know which ones.
So you have to be good at last-minute planning then, right?
Yeah, so you can either plan for tomorrow or you can plan 6 months out, but anything in between is impossible.
That'd be tough.
Yeah, it is.
That would be
it's
tough.
frustrating. But beyond that, I've liked my job.
That's good. That's good. Do you think that's true for most judges?
Yes,
Good. Yeah. That says something about our legal system then.
I hope so.
Yeah. So what
And
do you
we
both
have, by and large, we have good judges here in Allen County. I was proud to be a part of them.
So other than being proud of being part of it's not called the judgeship, the judicial system in Allen County, I guess.
Okay.
What are you most proud of? You started a program, didn't you?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I'm not that familiar with this program.
Reentry court.
Reentry
Started in 2000, 2001. At that point, the research was, and continues to be, this was about the extent of the research at that time. People who went to prison were something like 3 times more likely, or 60. That was it. 60% of them or more, 2/3 of them, would be back in the penitentiary within 3 years.
Yike.
And so we tried to do something about it. So we set up a program where people could get out a little bit early, not a lot, but a little bit early. They come out on home detention, close supervision, and wraparound services for whatever they needed. We got, for instance, one thing we did in Indiana, if you had certain convictions, you couldn't get welfare. Well, we got some legislation passed, and you asked about legislation before, and we got this started, written, and passed, that if somebody was in an established reentry program and was doing well, they became entitled to welfare in spite of the fact that they otherwise would have been exempted.
Which
So
keeps
that-
them from going out and stealing things. Yeah.
We had I don't know whether you know or not about Blue Jacket, but
yes.
Blue Jacket started in-house at community corrections as a part of reentry, and then went outside as a
Okay.
freestanding not-for-profit.
I didn't
So
realize
finding people jobs, which is necessary, of course.
And they run a thrift store, a way for people that are interviewing for jobs and that kind of thing
Right.
to get adequate clothing, and they're down on South Calhoun. So.
Right. We established a partnership with Park Center. The previous director before Paul Wilson was always of an opinion, even Paul for a short time, was of an opinion of, you have your population and we have ours. And the DOC sponsored, Department of Corrections sponsored a joint conference. It was down in Bartholomew County. about how really there's a very strong overlap between their population and ours. And he came on. He stepped right up and is still is a member of the board of Community Corrections. And we have a real strong partnership with them to provide necessary services and medication for defendants in need, which didn't always happen. I can't tell you how many times I hear from folks who commit some really serious crimes. Well, I was doing okay until I went off my meds. Well, why'd you go off my meds? And there were two reasons. Either they couldn't afford them,
Right.
and they quit buying them, couldn't get them, or they didn't like the side effects. And they didn't have enough direction to understand that those kind of meds are very fragile, and that it isn't an easy diagnosis, and it's a trial and error situation. So that if you can't live with the side effects, you need to go see your doc and get a different prescription that may do the same thing but not have the adverse effects. But these people don't think that far out, so they need help doing that.
Well, and mental health is not something America talks about very much, really.
No, it's true. We're finally. It's entirely different now than it was when I started.
Oh, yeah, very definitely. So, well, that's interesting. That's a really good thing that you did. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So, plans for the future? You have none, right?
No.
Going to keep biking?
Yeah, I'm having some trouble right now with my back, and I get all that stuff fixed first, and then I get back to biking. Yeah.
And we don't mean motorcycle biking; we mean biking.
Bicycles.
So, yeah. So, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think
before
we
we
pretty
wind
well
it up.
covered it.
Well, I'd like to thank Judge Surbeck. This has been fun. I've enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Enjoyed this. We'll have
too.
to go out to dinner again sometime
Yes, absolutely.
and talk again. This is Nancy McCammon Hansen. I am the outgoing convener of the Fort Wayne Area League of Women Voters. I'd like to encourage you to listen to some of our other radio shows on our website, which is www.lwvfw for League of Women Voters Fort Wayne.org, www.lwvfw.org. I would also like to encourage you to look at our Facebook page. We try to post news articles and information about things going on in the community, but also pieces from different parts of the country that are educational, that to help you understand issues and give you different opinions from writers about those issues and where we are in this country. And I'd also like to thank WELT 95.7. We are recording this right now at the Downtown Public Library. These folks have been just awesome to us. They have been so helpful. This is going to be the last show that we do for a while. We're going to take a break and regroup a little bit. We're all kind of tired after the election this year. So do listen to the stories on our website, and hopefully we'll be back sometime soon. Once again, thanks to Judge John Surbeck, and this is Nancy McCammon Hansen for Policy Matters by the Fort Wayne Area League of Women Voters.